news. All right. So this weekend, March 15th and 16th, in support of our We Own Winter contest, we have a local diving adventures weekend planned to Mermet Springs. I think it's going to be Nick and the gang down there making some dives, and it should be pretty weather. So 'tis a season. So pack your gear and head to Mermet and log your dives and post your adventures online, and make sure and tag Y-kiki Divers in that. We've got a few social things coming up that I wanted to make sure everybody has on their calendar. Garmin, our Garmin rep, is going to be coming into town. Jonathan, what's his name? Josh. That's terrible. Anyway, Josh will be here. And he's going to do a product knowledge seminar for customers. So kind of a dog and pony show. Even this dog can come. A dog and pony show and wine and cheese kind of event. It's going to be March 31st, 6:30 p.m. here at the store. So if you want to talk any Garmin products, the InReach products, any of those kinds of things, he'll be available. And, we'll have some just a social evening is what it's meant to be.
The new X50i?
The new X50, the new X50i, exactly. Yeah, that is this crowd for sure. You could take a couple pounds off your weight belt with that puppy. We, again, on a social note, we've scheduled a bunko for, it's Thursday, April 17th at 6:30 p.m. So my friend Tammy Fennell, her husband works for us here on staff. And when we were in Little Cayman, she forced us all to play bunko. And all
your first time?
Yeah, it was. I'll be gosh darned it if we didn't have just the very best time, right? So this is open to everybody. Again, just an opportunity to get together and be social. And I went reluctantly, I will admit. And I dragged a few people in. I'm like, I gotta make Tammy happy. Yeah, I was getting a little goosed. All right. In addition, we've got Cody Brooks. She's with Patty, our regional manager with Patty. She's going to be in town, and she's going to help us launch the Master Scuba Diver program. Patty has a consumer contest going on, and she's available to talk about it, highlight all the details. And that'll be on April 22nd at 6:30. In addition, mark your calendars for April 26th and 27th. That's actually going to be the very first weekend we're back at Mermet Springs doing open water training dives. And Marco, our instructor, Marco, will be there. He's going to be hosting fun dives and a poker run. So there is zero skill involved. You're going to go swim around and you're going to find clothespins, and you're going to trade the clothes in, or chips, or whatever we decide to do. Trade those in for cards, and then he who has the best poker hand wins, right? So just an excuse to get out and go diving. That's going to be April 26th and 27th. Mark your calendars for Pennyroyal, May 24th and 25th. That's going to be over Memorial Weekend. We always like to go down to Pennyroyal on a 3-day weekend since it's a little further out there to get to in Kentucky. But they've got some of the best shallow sections around. Anson Rhinesmith's going to be our host. We've got classes. Please check those out. So we've got Bill Harrison is teaching his yoga diver class. So Bill, years and years ago, when he was learning to do doubles, he had to do valve drills and realized he couldn't reach back to do his valve drills. He started taking yoga classes to get his stretching, his flexibility in better shape. And of course, being Bill, he moved on and became a yoga instructor. And he's incorporated a lot of those things that you do in yoga, breathing techniques, stretching techniques, and has put together a really cool class. So Bill's yoga class is coming up in this March. We've got Reactivate courses for those of you that might have been out of the water for a while. Enriched air, it just increases your bottom time, and a great tool to have in your tool belt, and then equipment specialist. So I am going to be adding some more travel webinars. The one that I officially have on the calendar is set for April 3rd at 6 p.m. I'm going to talk all about our Thailand trip on the Master Liveaboard. In terms of travel for this year, I have availability still have availability for the girls trip. So if you thought you might have missed the boat, I still can get space at the hotel, and I still have the airspace. So Sunscape Curacao in June. We've got one resort view room and a mail share for the Lions Dive trip, and that one's going to be in September. Space available on our Statia trip in October. And then Cozumel is wide open for October. So if you haven't booked anything for the fall, now is the time to do so. And then finally, I have one spot left for our Galapagos trip aboard the MV Aqua. Expedition leader is going to be Christina Zanato, December 1st through the 16th. One spot left. I can move some people around, so it could either be a male or a female to join us on taking our last spot on the Galapagos trip. Once again, that trip is special because it has a dual permit. So we're going to do a little bit of land-based stuff as well as tremendous diving for 2 weeks of absolute stellar fun in the sun. So Galapagos. With that, I do want to take this opportunity to introduce our guest speaker tonight, although really she arrives, doesn't really need an introduction. But Jill Heinerth is an underwater explorer, a writer, a photographer, a speaker, and a filmmaker. A pioneer of technical rebreather diving, Jill is the first explorer in residence of the Royal Canadian Geographic Society. Her best-selling autobiography, Into the Planet, has been lauded by the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and Oprah Magazine. Jill is a fellow of the International Scuba Diving Hall of Fame, the Women Divers Hall of Fame, the Explorers Club, and the Underwater Academy of Arts and Sciences. From technical dives deep inside underwater caves to being the first person to swim inside Antarctica icebergs, my hands sweat just reading those chapters. By the way, Jill, even thinking about it, I'm like, oh. Okay, Heinerth collaborates with climatologists, archaeologists, biologists, and engineers worldwide. She has made TV programs for the CBC, the BBC, National Geographic, consulted on movies for directors including James Cameron, and produced independent films. Over 2.5 million people have learned about climate change, water advocacy, and exploration by viewing Jill's TED Talks. Jill serves as a tireless advocate for conservation, climate change, and water resource protection. She works towards creating awareness and inspiring action through her writing, photography, films, social media, podcasts, and speaking engagements. Tonight she joins us. I couldn't be more humbled by her accepting my invitation to join us as a guest speaker. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about, too, her diving into the darkness. It's a film that's coming out real soon. I was watching the trailer on it. So without further ado, would you all please join me in welcoming Miss Jill Heinerth. Yay!
Thanks. Thanks so much. It's great to join you. I'm calling in from a small town near Ottawa, Canada. So I can't believe you guys had 80 degrees today. I'm very, very jealous. Anyway, I thought I would share with you a little bit about, my life and my diving expeditions and some of the things that I've learned from those experiences. And I call that the exploration mindset, because really everything that I've done in diving has kind of informed me to move forward in diving, but also to do things better in other parts of my life as well. So I grew up in Canada, and like many of you, love the outdoors and love water. But I also grew up at a time when we would watch astronauts walking on the surface of the moon, the Apollo missions in the 60s. And that made me want to be an explorer. I mean, it made me want to be an astronaut, but frankly, we didn't have a Canadian space program or girl astronauts at that time. So it still left this indelible thought in my mind that I would find a way to explore. And, these days, the gear that I take to go diving is probably closer to a spacesuit than what most people wear to dive. So it's a lot of equipment that I carry around the world and drag into the water on projects across the planet. So sometimes the work that I do involves a big team, a lot of support. Sometimes there's nobody that wants to get in the water with me because it's too cold. But that is part of what I do. I spend a lot of time in the polar regions, like here in Canada's Arctic on the sea ice. But I also go to places where you might have been, like have any of you been to the Pit in Mexico? It's a pretty popular site now. Okay, I see Chad's raising his hand. So this is what the pit used to look like when my first husband and I discovered the deep caves inside the pit and mapped those deep passages for the first time. So yeah, my work takes me around the world to some strange places where you wouldn't even imagine that we find water. But here, this was a National Geographic project I led in the western desert of Egypt, where we dove in some pretty strange water places. But my work's taken me to Russia. Like this is in the world's longest underwater gypsum cave. And then, of course, to Rex as well. Like this is down in Truck Lagoon, a place where I'm returning to in another week's time, where the remains of the Japanese fleet sunk in World War II lie at the bottom of a huge lagoon. It's an absolutely stunning place to dive. So my work has also included teaching over the years. I just finally hung up my fins for teaching because I'm so busy with other things, but I did have a chance to take this guy on his first cave dives. That's James Cameron there, and that was a great opportunity to take him cave diving. So a lot of the things that I do underwater now are involving scientific research and filming or photography for television or magazines. And it's not all caves. So some of what I do involves interactions with beautiful animals like whale sharks or mobile arrays in the Azores or manatees in Crystal River, like I'm sure many of you have seen. But my favorite environment is cave diving. And for me, cave diving is something that's really, really special. So many people think, "Ah, but it's dark. Why would you wanna go in these, underwater caves, wet rocks," you know? But it is so much more than the blackness. I think of caves, underwater caves, like museums of natural history. I mean, these places, although some spaces are small, there are huge spaces inside underwater caves. Spaces I could put your whole dive shop inside some of the rooms inside underwater caves. And these museums of natural history can teach us about climate change, about Earth's past climate, about animals that live their life in the darkness, about um, ancient civilizations that use these as portals to another world. And for me, as an artist, going into a cave, especially when it's for the first time and nobody has ever explored it before, and bringing back images is just an incredible opportunity because many of these places are unbelievably beautiful. And just having a chance to see a place like that and to explore a place like that is just such a privilege to me. So, through my explorations, I've really learned that we are all seekers. You're all seekers too, or else you wouldn't be on this call tonight. Uh, and if you're a seeker underwater, then you're someone who's actually making the maps for other people to follow. And that started for me back in the mid 1990s when I was working with Bill Stone from the US Deep Caving Team in a place called Huautla, Mexico. And this is in a very mountainous part of Mexico where the mountains are just shrouded by rainforests and mist, and it's just beautiful. But inside these mountains are caves, top to bottom cave systems that would look somewhat like this map if I kind of peeled away the front of the mountain. So there are, many entrances and unbelievably, you know, deep caves inside. So like if you get to a sump inside this cave, like this location here where you're at an underground lake, basically, you can't go any farther without diving. when you finish a dive there and get out of the water, your tank would have to go back up out of the mountain to get filled again. And that's 2 miles of rope to reach this spot. So it's a heck of a heavy lifting for for getting gear to the dive site. So back in '95, we were there to explore the bottom end of the system and try to match up with what explorers had done the year before. So we had to hike, 6,000 feet down a mountain, establish a base camp at this place called a resurgence, where the water comes out of the mountain from the cave system. But when we got there in '95, the water looked like this. So it was completely no visibility. There had been mudslides in the mountain, and it had all washed down through the caves and into this valley. And as I mentioned just a little few minutes ago, exploration is about making maps. And if you can't see, it's pretty hard to make a map. Now, we did manage to make a map pretty much by feel on this project, but we started brainstorming about how to make maps of caves that we couldn't see. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but at the time, it was just important for us to brainstorm and get together with open minded people who didn't care if the idea was crazy, but were willing to chase that dream anyway. And so around a campfire, literally, Dr. Bill Stone said, I can build something that will map a cave even if we can't see it, but I need about $1.5 million. And I need about, 150 volunteers, and it's going to take me 2 years to build the equipment. And 2 years later, he had done it. And we were at Wakulla Springs in North Florida, starting to test that gear back in 1997. And this was the world's first accurate three-dimensional mapping device that we could drive through the cave and it could ping the walls and create a fully three-dimensional map. So it was quite a bit of a beast to drive. It was over 6 feet long, 330 pounds, and that's just the mapper. So everything else that I had to carry for those dives was pretty significant. Plus, we built some pretty crazy, unproven infrastructure to support some really long diving missions. Because we were going, just to give you a sense of the dive times, like 300 feet was the max depth in the cave, and the cave's pretty flat, uh, between 90 and 100 meters. And we were doing 5 or 6 hours of bottom time, followed by decompression. So those are some pretty long dives that for me were as long as like 22-hour missions. And you'd have to drive the mapper, drag an extra scooter, wear 2 rebreathers, carry 5 or 6 tanks, a bunch of other gear, a camera system for me. So the combined total weight of that equipment would be 500 or 600 pounds to drag off through the cave, swimming well into the system. But we created this crazy infrastructure to allow us to do some of the decompression time dry inside that transfer capsule that you can see in the image that we could lock into a recompression chamber. So it was a pretty creative way to handle the long dives. But we also developed some radio sensing technology that would allow people topside to follow our path. And they could be walking through the woods in the case of this photo, with us directly beneath their feet, 300 feet beneath their feet, swimming through the cave. And there were times we went to some pretty crazy places over the years with this equipment, like underneath this poor person's house in a golf course community in Florida. Or if any of you have been to the Sonny's Barbecue restaurant in Alachua, Florida, we swam underneath the restaurant and actually right underneath the potato salad in the salad bar. And through using that technology, we also did some other interesting explorations and caving in urban systems beneath Gainesville, Florida, where we were going through the storm water sewer system, which I've been reading this week is like apparently full of alligators. So I sure didn't see any in there. But part of that project was really helping us to understand exactly where our drinking water lies and how our activities topside can affect that drinking water. And that's a pretty important thing to work on. And for me, something that really drives my sense of purpose, because the water that comes out of those caves feeds a spring, and those springs lead to bigger rivers, and those rivers and springs act as beautiful grounds for, a mother and a baby manatee to live. But also those springs and cave systems and those water systems can transport nutrients that can cause algal blooms as well. And so it's important for us to know where our water is, how we might be influencing it, and how we can protect it for future generations. And that work has gone one step further since the 90s when we first started with that device. Now, that device is called Sunfish, and it's a fully autonomous, artificially intelligent robot cave mapper that can swim through the cave without me driving it. So I've still gotten to be, very, involved in the process of this device, documenting it through its development cycles as it continues to learn. But now it can explore a cave without me. It can make a choice to swim this tunnel or that tunnel, conserve its batteries, um, navigate on its own, turn around when it needs to, and come back with a map, which is really exciting. Not just to map caves or deep ocean environments or contaminated environments where I couldn't go to, but this is ultimately destined to go to Jupiter's moon Europa and explore the liquid ocean beneath the frozen surface of the moon. So pretty cool. So from the success of that project, I recognize that explorers really are leaders. We're ready to do things that others have deemed impossible, step into the darkness and find the solution to get things done. And back in, 25 years ago now, that was something that really stuck in my mind, doing something that people thought was impossible. And about a year earlier, we'd been watching these cracks developing in the Ross Ice Shelf in Antarctica. And we were watching this sliver of ice that you can see on that satellite photo separating from Antarctica. And that was the largest iceberg in recorded history. There's a lot of talk about A23, the iceberg that's out there today. People keep calling it the largest iceberg. Well, A23 is only about a quarter of the size of this one. And I pitched to National Geographic with my colleague Wes Skiles that we would go down there and be the first people to cave dive inside an iceberg. And honestly, it was a hypothesis when we went. We didn't know if we would find caves in the icebergs. We didn't know if it would be possible. But as you can see, we did indeed find massive systems through these cracks and crevices and tunnels inside the icebergs. And also places where the icebergs got stuck on the seafloor and there were tunnels beneath the iceberg that we could swim through and see some of the life within these places. But just getting there was a 12-day crossing of the Southern Ocean from New Zealand to the Ross Ice Shelf in up to 60-foot seas. So unbelievably difficult transit just to get to the Ross Ice Shelf and find the iceberg before we could even start our dives, which ended up as, if those that have read my book will know, were pretty perilous dives with some remarkably close calls on a number of dives. But I'm really glad to have had the opportunity to take that chance and gain the confidence of National Geographic to go down there and do this project. And I learned so much about the ice, about teamwork, and interestingly enough, this photo, which I shot on film, um, literally hours after I shot this photo, this entire chunk of the iceberg we'd just been inside of literally exploded and turned into a sea of slush as far as the eye could see. So if you're an explorer, you got to be pretty resilient and adaptable to continue to forge forward. And the kind of people that I look for when I'm building a team are those adaptable, versatile people with lots of different skills. Like they don't have to be the best at one particular skill. I want people that are good generalists, people that won't walk by a sink full of dirty dishes if they see it. So some of the scientists that I work with are archaeologists, paleontologists, and I've done a lot of work in all over Mexico for decades now, and I really have a soft spot in my heart for Mexico. Some of the places that we dive in are in the cenotes, and I'm sure some of you have dived the cenotes in the Yucatan. This is actually near Merida, more in the central part of the Yucatan rather than the coastal areas near Tulum and Cancun and Akumal. So here the groundwater is a little bit deeper. So we rappel down into these caves, in this case, about 70 feet from the surface to the water. And so these tree roots are also descending 70 feet down. And if you look inside some of these places, this is what you would see. So this photo shot by my colleague Wes is the inside of a drinking water well. So the bright spot in the center of the picture at the top is the underside of the well, and then that stripe down the center is the pipe. So as we dive down in the water here, we're actually pretty interested. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at myself in reverse. We're interested in this pile of debris here over my shoulder that represents everything that's fallen in there over time. And so, we find things like there's a cow skull that was probably ritually placed in this location. And I say that because it wasn't just any cow skull, it actually had silver adorned on its teeth. That was kind of interesting. But we also find things like this Spanish colonial water carrying vessel, and then we find extinct animals as well. Like this is an extinct sloth. This is actually in a cave in Cuba. And this sloth was a pretty significant find. And then we also find human remains in these places because many cenotes or caves are, like I said, portals to another world, to ancient civilizations. And they had ritual burials in these places, and they had accidents in these places too. So in the past, we would be tasked with bringing some of these objects back to archaeologists and paleontologists for study. But the permitting takes years just to get a permit to remove a skull from a cave. And then it takes like sometimes years to stabilize that artifact with conservation efforts. And it's very expensive to do that. So we were looking for better ways to bring back that information to scientists instead of bringing out the objects. And today we actually scan environments underwater, 3D uh, viewing opportunities for the scientists so that they can see the context of all of the objects within the cave and what the cave looks like. So they can see a skull beside a chunk of pottery, beside some other things. And since then, we've also improved what we do with our scans. And Corey Jaskolski here in this shot, who's my colleague who used to be the Innovation Fellow for National Geographic, uh, gave us the opportunity to do the scanning and then create holograms. So Corey's wearing something called a HoloLens, and he's the only person able to see the objects projected in the environment that we've just scanned underwater. So you're seeing on the screen now us taking the images for the scan, and then what you're seeing here is a saber-toothed bear skull on top of a virtual table. And so that's augmented reality. That's a hologram, but everything that you see around it is the actual environment. So Corey can actually reach out and use his fingers like to operate a menu system, swap some things on the table, and then he's able to see that. So it's pretty compelling, and the level of detail is truly remarkable, like 80 to 100,000 data points per square inch. And so instead of bringing the skull out of the cave, we can send this data to scientists for them to see and explore. And we can send it to many scientists all at once. It also gives us a chance to share what we've seen with our indigenous guides. Like in this case, our Mayan guide is actually looking through the HoloLens and seeing his ancestors. So I've learned that collaboration is really important in the work that I do because technology has driven a lot of the explorations that I've done. And that technology doesn't come from just one person. It takes a team to build these kind of tools, a team with many different viewpoints and skills, artists and scientists and technologists, engineers working together. Now, I also have a pretty keen interest in the biology of caves because there's a lot of unique life living in these environments in the complete blackness, like this cave adapted shrimp. So the shrimp has no eyes, no coloration at all, but it does have some other pretty cool sensory capabilities. There are also fish that live in caves that have no eyes and no pigment. And again, they have some pretty interesting characteristics. Like this crustacean called Remipede actually has venomous fangs and pincers, and it can attack its prey, neutralize it, turn its guts into jello, and then suck the life out of it over time. So, if this tiny animal was the size of a cat, it would actually be the deadliest thing on earth. And yet, it's still swimming in the caves today. So, we can find it in the fossil record over 65 million years old, but the same animal is still swimming through the caves. And many of these cave adapted animals turn out to have remarkable longevity as well, like this pallid crayfish from the caves in Florida. Its sister organism, like a river crayfish, will only live 2 to 3 years, but this one will live 200 years in the cave. These days, I'm doing some pretty exciting cave biology work in Canada's longest underwater cave system, not too far from where I live. And you can see the visibility is not great. This is the best visibility I've ever seen of this cave because it's usually 1 to 2 feet of viz, but it's full of life. So what you're seeing in this photo that looks like a piece of snot hanging from the ceiling is actually a caddisfly larva feeding net. So caddisflies begin their life as insects underwater, and they spin this mucus web to collect food that just moves through the water column. And sometimes I find their little feeding nets hanging all along my cave diving safety line, like in this case. It kind of looks like dirty socks. But the reason why I'm interested in this cave is because it's full of filter feeding organisms. So what you're seeing on the floor of this cave is hundreds, if not thousands, of mussels, freshwater mussels covered with sponges. And it turns out the freshwater mussels have a pretty interesting life cycle. They actually need a fish to assist with reproduction. And I knew nothing about this until I started exploring this cave. So, what happens with freshwater mussels is that once a year, like this particular species, the plain pocketbook mussel, the female collects sperm from the water column. And when she's brooding, she actually builds a lure out of her own flesh. And that lure looks just like a fish with fins and a tail and an eye spot. And she flicks that lure to attract a fish to bite it. And when the fish bites, she sprays her young into the mouth of the fish, and the little hinged shells actually latch onto the gills and the fins of the fish to go for a free ride for weeks or months before they're old enough to survive on their own. And while they're going for their free ride, they're actually sucking the blood serum from the fish. And we know this, and we've proven this because we've actually gone to the river and caught many fish. We bring them up into a little trough and then we actually inspect their gills to find the microscopic babies. In this case, that's a sturgeon. In another case, this is a walleye. And so it's these little, what they're called is glochidia, little hinged bivalves. On the one photo, you can see them just loose, and on the other photo, the yellow spots are the glochidia actually encysted in the fish gills, feeding off the blood supply in the fish gills. So this is what the lure looks like. It looks just like a fish sitting on top of the mussel, but that's all flesh from the mussel which has no eyes and no brain, but came up with this incredible strategy to reproduce. So pretty amazing. The other kind of work that I really love doing, and I've done a lot of biology work also in this cave in the Bahamas, but but also working with paleoclimatologists who are interested in how the Earth's climate has changed over time. And we can learn about that from some of these formations. So these caves were once dry, well, actually several times dry. And so the formations are created when the cave is dry, when rain is soaking into the ground and dripping from the ceiling to the floor. But within this cave in Abaco in the Bahamas, we find a lot of red and orange material as well. And that's pretty interesting to us because it's so uniquely different. And we collect that material and had it analyzed and discovered that it's actually dust from the Sahara Desert. So, in dry times, dust from the Sahara Desert will blow up into the atmosphere and cross the Atlantic Ocean and then rain down on places like the Bahamas or even the eastern seaboard in Florida. And that slowly, slowly will move its way down through the ground and end up in cave systems where, we can sample it in these little layers, or we can actually see it, disturbed in the bottom, or we can find it sealed inside rocks. So those are the rocks that are the most interesting to people studying climate change because they've asked us to remove some of these stalagmites and bring them out so they can be sliced open because you can actually look back in time at the layers of deposition. And in this cave, we've actually come up with a 450,000 year timeline of history from looking at the rings inside the stalagmites. So it's much like looking at tree rings or looking at ice cores to figure out what the climate was like at other times. So that cave had been dry 4 times in Earth's history over 450,000 years. Now, I'll take you on a little journey through a bit of underwater Canada because you might not know what we've got up here to dive. And one of the places I love to dive is Newfoundland. Newfoundland has everything. It has wrecks. It has big animals and whales and icebergs. Here, you're actually looking at World War II shipwrecks that were sunk by German U-boats, and that's actually a big gun on one of the wrecks. And these wrecks have become artificial reefs, but they were once carrying iron ore that was really critical to the shipbuilding efforts in World War II. And that iron ore came from a mine, also in Newfoundland, that we dive in, where it's almost like wreck diving in a cave because of all of the gears and equipment and lines that are still within that mine today. So it's kind of like diving on industrial archaeology, but also with a more personal touch. Like some of the walls, many of the walls have inscriptions on them. And like this one in particular, a guy, drew his own caricature and signed his name. But we also find more ominous inscriptions on the walls, like tiny crosses almost straight up from my finger. And that shows a point where someone lost their life in the cave when it was a mine. And 106 miners actually lost their lives in this mine. But if we go to the opposite side of Canada, to the British Columbia West Coast, we have a completely different feel to the ocean there. It's warmer, and we have a lot of really curious animals like sea lions, which are fantastic to dive with. It's almost like, playing with a pack of puppies. They just come, running towards you as soon as you jump in the water. But sometimes diving with sea lions becomes a bit more like a bar fight because they're really mouthy and they tug and pull at your gear and nibble at you. In fact, on this dive, I actually had a sea lion bite through my dry suit. Didn't hurt me, but did flood my dry suit. So out there, seafloor is incredibly colorful and beautiful, much like it is also under the sea ice in the north, in the polar regions. Like here, you're looking at frozen ocean. So the sea ice, this is, salt water. And you can see it breathing. You can see the sea ice moving up and down because this is springtime as it's breaking up and moving out, because this area where the polar bear is walking will soon be open ocean again. And so here we get a chance to dive with, ring seals and polar bears and bearded seals, bowhead whales, narwhals, belugas. That's a bowhead there. Just many, many amazing animals. But it's not easy. It requires a lot of time, a lot of trips in order to capture the right footage for a film. Like in this case, these are clips that you're seeing from a film that Mario Cyr and I did called Under Thin Ice, which is still showing on TV these days. So in that project, we were in the water with walruses, which are incredibly dangerous, and also in the water with wild polar bears. Probably one of the craziest things I've ever done. And probably something I will choose not to do again. I love seeing polar bears, but when you're in the water with them, it's a lot. That's a polar bear footprint beside my hand to give you a sense of scale. And this is the boat that we dive out of when we're swimming with polar bears. And if you saw the other side of that boat, you would actually see claw marks down the side of it where we were hit by a polar bear that was looking for lunch. So in that part of the Arctic, rather than tents, we're actually in a small cabin. There's actually 6 of us sharing a 10 by 10 cabin for a little bit more comfort. And there's our charging station that leads to the generator. So pretty crazy stuff. But the Arctic waters are beautiful. Besides the big animals, very, very colorful environments. And the ice itself is something that is just amazing to document. So yeah, a lot of people ask me, like, if I'm fearless, and I'm not fearless. I'm scared every time I go diving, and I think that's a really important message to share with people, like, being scared or just having a, feeling in the pit of your stomach, it means that you care about risk. I wanna dive with people that are scared because we all care about coming home safely to our family at the end of the day, and I know that what I do is dangerous, but I choose to take these risks for a reason that's important to me. It's important to me to bring back information about climate change and water issues and share that with the world. And so I communicate that very clearly, with my husband and my family, so they know why I'm doing this, why I'm taking these risks. But I think it's important, the unknown is scary, right? So it's appropriate to feel scared, but I want to encourage people in every aspect of their lives to be willing to step into the darkness, be willing to experience fear, mitigate the risks, deal with everything before you submerge, and then have a great opportunity to document something that's new for you, or maybe something that's new for humanity, and then share those stories with people because now more than ever we need for people to listen to stories, get wrapped up in the awe of it, but then also absorb a bit of the truth about what we're facing with water issues and climate change. And that's really important. And at the risk of being even slightly political, I'll say that talking and collaboration is just so important these days. Like, we cannot sit back and silent anymore. We're facing existential threats in so many facets of life, and so it's important for us to have conversations, not be divided, but just to share in our civil discourse with each other the things that we've learned and the things that are important to us. And so I think this is a chance for us to answer some questions, and anything goes. I'll take any question: diving, politics, whatever, climate change, water issues. Just go for it.
Just checking the chat. I don't see any questions in the chat yet, so
Okay.
the floor is open, gang.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so when I'm watching you, Jill, I'm wondering, when you're creating these projects, are you
Mm-hmm.
collaborating and going and making presentations, or are other entities, now that they know who you are and the people that you collaborate with, are,
Mm-hmm.
are they asking you to go do projects? How
Mm-hmm.
does that work these days?
It's a little bit of both. So I've chosen throughout my life to remain independent. I don't have like a sustaining paycheck. Like everything is project based. So sometimes I'm generating those projects. Sometimes I'm generating the ideas and then pitching them to National Geographic or other entities, and then at other times, like the BBC's, will reach out and hire me to do a gig, go film some icebergs, or collaborate on a story or something like that. So it's a little bit of everything. But it literally started with me selling everything I owned, moving to the Cayman Islands, writing stories, taking pictures, and mailing them to magazines, hoping to find someone to publish. So yeah, it's you never quite know where the next meal is coming from, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.
So Troy has asked if your family dives with you ever.
No, I did certify my husband. He's only done about 20 dives. It's not his thing. No one else in my family dives. So Robert does have veto power though over my projects. So I've given him that. Oh, I see one here. Do you share any of your research with governments? Have any government agencies made research difficult for you and your teams? I've actually worked with quite a few governments. So I've done a lot of work with NOAA, with the National Park Service down in the US over the years. Unfortunately, some of those people have lost their jobs recently. Um, and I do a lot of work like with Department of Fisheries and Oceans here in Canada, but even in other places, like I met with the president of Slovenia once and sat down with him to talk about water issues. So yeah, I've done stuff with the UN and yeah, everything I try to share. Oh, I didn't finish with difficulties for you and your teams. Yeah, I'm worried about science going into the future. I'm worried about all the cuts that are happening right now and some of the American agencies that are quite critical to science at a time when that information is important. Um, these days, I would say that less and less money is coming from government entities to fund research and science, and there's more and more of us going hat in hand to private organizations to assist in funding research. Okay, Chelsea is asking, you mentioned diving in an iceberg and how not long after part of it exploded. Would the slush have been diveable, or did you guys well, the slush is diveable, but we would have been killed from that iceberg collapse if we'd been inside. There's no doubt in my mind. I've done a lot of iceberg diving since then, and I'm, very careful about how I choose and where I choose to dive because they are such transitional environments. So that was a lucky one we got away from. And any advice for first-time cave divers who are definitely afraid? If you're afraid, you're my kind of cave diver. Seriously, when you're taking a class, you're supposed to make mistakes. Otherwise, you don't need the class. And you are a far better diver than your instructor for cave diving will ever get to see, because your instructor's job is to push you every dive to do a little bit more and a little bit more, something that you haven't done before. And you're not going to do it perfect the first time. So you're supposed to make mistakes. You should be afraid. You're going to sit with your instructor and make a plan and then stick with that plan. And just know in your heart when you leave the surface that if you've chosen to dive in an environment and a place that is within your skills and experience, then you've got the training. If you're following the rules, you've got the right gear, you've got the training. Whatever you need to get out of that situation, you're going to learn in that cave diving class. And just practice and keep up the skills, but you'll have fun.
So Jenna wants to know what's been your most rewarding dive or research.
My most rewarding, I think a lot of the dives that we did back on the Wakalo 2 project in the 90s were incredibly rewarding because for me, that was a paradigm shift moment. Like, we raised all the money for that project, a buck at a time. I spent my entire life savings buying 2 rebreathers, Paul and I, and we spent $50,000 on 2 rebreathers at that time. We spent 2 years of our life training. But the results of that project were a paradigm shift, because up until that point, scientists weren't terribly interested in the data that we were bringing back because they didn't think that it was specific or accurate. They thought that we were like adrenaline sports junkies, like skydivers. But after that project, after we delivered the goods and started telling them about where this technology could go, it changed everything. It meant that cave divers were active participants in citizen science and engineering, and were valued. Yeah.
So I was curious, that sunfish, is it tethered to the surface or is it tethered to something that you guys are towing along?
It's no longer tethered at all, actually. So we used to attach a tether to it to look over its shoulder while it was learning, so we could see what it was doing. But now we don't use a tether at all. And so we just put it in the water. Like the last dive that I did with it was out in the Channel Islands in California with a project with NOAA, and we literally set the thing in the water and gave it instructions to go find a cave, map it, and come back. And it did. So it doesn't need any instructions.
So how long did
AI.
that take for to get to that point? So from, when the scientists came up with the concept first, and then to the point where you can just send it on autonomously.
About 27 years.
And I think that's important, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's incremental
Yeah.
knowledge. Right? It's
It's
incremental learning, and you have to start somewhere.
Yep.
And it may not be perfect. And just like you're even describing becoming a cave diver, right? I mean,
Yep.
it's all incremental. It's not
Absolutely.
you're in the Antarctica and you're, diving in caves. It's you're going to go in a certain depth and you're going to incrementally learn.
Yep. Yep.
And that knowledge, and we as a people have to fund those kinds of projects. It's not going to be an instantaneous reward, right? But at the end of the day,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
the
And
data, an autonomous, machine that can map and used to say, go map it. That's incredible.
Yeah, and every step of the way, like when we started way back, brainstorming around a campfire, um, it was just this idea, this crazy idea. Could we do it? Where would it go? We didn't know. And quite frequently, whether you're facing an issue or you've got a new idea, you can't always see where it's going to go. You just have to put the next best step forward, right? And the same thing if you're having an emergency underwater. You may not be able to think about how you're getting out of the cave, but you know what the next right thing is to do. So you just keep plodding, relentlessly towards that. And it all comes together. Like, I don't even know how much money's been spent on that over the years, but every dollar was, raised a buck at a time kind of thing through private entities. And it's never been a government project. It's always been private vision. So it's pretty exciting.
So Jen has asked how often you dive these days, and do you ever just go for fun?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I don't even know how to describe what's a fun dive and what's a work dive because, I'm just always out catching photos or getting some footage that maybe I'll use one day or working on research or whatever else. So yeah, I dive a lot. I'm on my way to truck next week, so I'm very excited to get back into the warm water for a change.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Scott's got
Yeah.
some.
Scott and I think Phil had a question. So plenty of stories about dry cave exploration and the danger of that. People getting stuck.
Yeah.
Sometimes those are, getting stuck, not be able to turn around and be fatal. What similar challenges does a cave diver encounter?
Yeah.
How do you mitigate the risks? I assume similar problems,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're working in an overhead environment, so the best people to save you are already in the cave with you. There's no white knight gonna show up. It's very unlikely that you will ever be rescued by anyone other than the people that you are with. And so, yeah, working in an overhead environment, there can be small spaces. You got to be sure you can either turn around or come back out again. You've got to maintain a guideline. You've got to have the redundancy in your gear. And you've got to be absolutely unwavering with your safety protocols, and never drift from them. Yeah. But frankly, for me, I prefer being underwater in a tight spot than in a dry cave in a tight spot. And I know that sounds weird, but I prefer to work without gravity.
So Scott is wondering, as a soon-to-be retired fella,
Mm.
he's a T40 CCR diver, would like to volunteer time as a research diver. He's tried a couple of avenues, and nobody is taking outside divers. Any advice for him?
Mm. Um, yeah, I think, I guess with legal liability these days, that especially the US, there's probably organizations that aren't able to bring you in. I mean, up here in Canada, like for instance, we have the Canadian Museum of Nature, and they have many volunteer divers, that will work with, when I need someone to help me in the river, for instance. Yeah, so I would say maybe find a non-governmental organization, and volunteer with them. Because, we need all kinds of volunteers. We need divers, but we also need like surface support and boat drivers, and every project is like that. So yeah, maybe
Or
try a
sell volume
non-governmental.
entertainment and start there?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Chelsea was asking, besides dive training, any education you would recommend for a job such as what you do, aiding in scientific research,
Mm.
ocean conservation, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, there is a scientific diver qualification that's quite valuable, so that you know how to engage in surveys and proper protocols for science. That's really helpful. Um, eh, but I would say, like, if you're looking to like have a job like mine, then I would say you need to be a good writer. You need to be a photographer. You need to be a public speaker. You need to be able to, write a grant proposal, for instance, go raise funds, and you know, maintain your website. So yeah, there's a lot of those sort of soft skills that are really important too, outside of the diving. In order to keep those costs down, you want to be able to do all that stuff yourself.
So, of course, I'll interject at this moment then, and make sure that everybody, if you haven't already done so, get your very own copy of Into the
Yeah.
Planet. I have it in book format, but I actually listened to it on audio, so which was audible, I should say, which was narrated by you, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I listened to you for a couple of weeks. It was wonderful.
All right. That's
You've
great.
also got this beautifully illustrated children's book called The Aquanaut. And
Hmm.
I bought it for my nieces and nephews, and it's just wonderful. So this is pretty delightful. And why don't you tell us, Jill, a little bit about the latest, the film?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I'll also tell you about the Aquanaut book. I partnered with Dolly Parton and the Imagination Library. She sent 8,000 copies of the Aquanaut to kids across North America. And for those of you that don't know about Dolly Parton's charity, like, reading was really important to her as a kid, and she has spent like tens of millions of dollars buying books and sending them to children who are less financially privileged. So these kids will receive a book like once a month. Um, I can't remember for how long she does it, but they get this at home addressed to themselves, and so I was really proud to partner with her on that. And I see in the chat someone's asking if I am doing more books. I am working on a follow-up to Into the Planet, and I also have a new kids book that's probably still a year away from hitting the shelves, called The Iceberg Explorer. And then Diving into the Darkness, the new film. So Diving into the Darkness is a documentary about my life, and the director Naze Baghai from Australia has used all of my archives in order to build the film, which is pretty much an adaptation of Into the Planet. And uh, we've been on the festival circuit for this year, and it's won quite a few awards. But very soon, like in the next couple of weeks, we'll finally have the streaming announcement to go out, and you should be able to see it very soon on many different platforms.
Excellent, excellent.
I'm just going to interject really quick. Ruben chimed in to let Scott know the Maritime American Historical Society provides training and accepts volunteers to participate in various projects. In case you don't know.
Yay. Great. Great.
And I also know several individuals that have they've had to interview for a volunteer position with various aquariums. So like the National
Yeah.
Aquarium. I know I've got several friends that have earned a spot on the volunteer program, but they
Nice.
clean, they clean the exhibits and that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
room for all of that to keep that's a
Yeah.
tremendous effort to keep them all rolling.
Yeah. That's a great suggestion.
So
Let's see more questions.
any more questions from out there? And yeah.
I don't have a question, but I would be remiss if I missed this opportunity, Jill, to thank you for your book, Into the Planet. I
Oh,
read it
thanks.
shortly after I got certified, and it was basically my catalyst to start cave diving. And
Oh, cool.
you have been a reason why I've spent way too much money probably in the past 4 years. So
Oh, I'm
thank you for
sorry.
that. No, please don't apologize. I've enjoyed every single minute of it. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks for that, Chad. I
yeah,
appreciate that.
Yeah, he's he goes and actually what I love about the diving, well, is it builds community, and
Yeah.
Chad has built community. He throws out on Facebook, "Hey, I'm going diving," and then he has this big a big group of folks that go and explore different cave sections and stuff like
Cool.
that. So, but Chad's always scooping up more people, which I absolutely, my heart swells. I love that kind of stuff, right?
Fantastic.
Community.
Earning my nickname as a buddy collector.
I love it. Absolutely. So, all
Great.
right. And I think everybody on the chats are thanking you as well as
Thanks.
I am. I was very humbled by your willingness to join us tonight. I'm a huge fan,
Thanks.
and I love your presentation in that your life is maybe something that is not what other folks might want to do. Right? Cave diving isn't for everybody, but the takeaways are the same, right?
Yeah.
And I love that as a business owner or anything in life, right? You really have to be fearless and but keep your wits about you, that sort of thing. And I think it's very important in today's world, especially. So
Absolutely.
We have one more question.
Oh, we do. Good.
Yeah, Jill, we have one more question from
Good,
Cindy,
good.
one of our instructors, one of our
Yeah.
instructors.
Oh, here we go.
She wants to know if you've got a recommendation for a cenote for a first time
Oh.
cave diving.
Well, a lot of people go to Car Wash for their first, or Ponderosa. Those are, or Taj Mahal. Those are all some of the places you might go for a first. Yeah. Or Dos Ojos. Dos Ojos.
Dos Ojos.
Yeah.
I remembered my husband. We went to. He got his cave training in Cozumel,
Yeah.
and we would drop him off on the side of the road with him and his instructor.
Yes.
And then we would go. I'm like, "Bye, honey. Have a good dive." And they're like, tramping through the forest, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Or the jungle. It was comical because, of course, we were going off and doing reef diving. So, but excellent.
Great. Excellent.
Well, on behalf of Y-kiki Divers and everybody online, we want to thank you for your time tonight, your excellent presentation, all the good, lovely work that you do, and we're supporting you, and we're really excited about what you do next, and we look forward to seeing you in the future, Jill.
And
Thanks so much.
I appreciate the way you presented because it made it really easy to record it.
Great. Yeah, no switching around. All right.
The piece of
When
cake.
you make the IT guys happy, Jill, I mean, come on.
Good stuff.
Well done. Yay.
Thank you, Jill.
All right. Have a good evening, everyone.
You
And
too.
if I missed anyone, just reach out to me at intotheplanet.com and I can answer offline. Take care.
Perfect. We'll do it. All right, Miss Jill. Thanks
Bye-bye.
again.
Good
Appreciate
night.
it.